Okay. You're going live in 0 seconds.
Yeah, we're live. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We're very sorry for the delay tonight. We're using new technology, but we are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook tonight. So, thank you, everyone, for your patience. And I have Greg Burke with me. He's an NCA member and financial.
Hello.
Greg, do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Greg is a NCA member and financial advisor of the party, and he's going to be presenting the true story on the Canada Pension Plan, everyone. And just this past week, we did a presentation on the foreign funding. There was a live presentation, and we showed billions and billions of dollars flowing out of the country under the current government and the previous government. It was no different to countries all over the world, and there was almost a billion, in the case of this government, unspecified. So we don't know where it's going. It's your tax money. It's your tax money, and they're just sending it all over the world, everyone. The previous government was over a billion, and this was only, I believe it was 2015. It was only for that 1 year. It was 1.2 billion spread all around the world. Your hardworking tax money. And then we went into immigration later this week. We showed the mass immigration coming in. As far as we're concerned, there's an invasion of Canada. It's being allowed by the globalist establishment. And these people coming in from their third world countries, to be honest, they're eventually going to turn us into the shithole countries they've come from. That's the honest truth, everyone. So this is all wrong. We're against this mass immigration. We want to cut back to 50,000 or less. We need to protect who we are as Canadians. So that's what the NCA stands for. We're concerned about the overtaxing of Canadian people. It's a form of control and slavery, and Greg's going to get into this. It's paying for this globalist agenda. It's paying for the socialist systems in place in Canada, everyone. This CPP, Greg's going to go into it. Your money is literally being stolen, everyone. Your money's being stolen. That's the honest truth. Uh, the way we figure everyone who's paid into CPP, assuming they did it at a young age, they should be millionaires. They should be millionaires. And we're going to go into that tonight. So I welcome you, Greg. Please share your insights.
Thank you, Steve, and hello to everybody. If I could get everybody to, I just get a little adjustment at the camera here, but if I can get everybody that's listening, just indicate where you're from, I'd appreciate it. And Stephen will be through the interview be asking anybody that's listening to join the party and to donate to the party. The reason being is it costs millions of dollars to bring a party to Ottawa. Unfortunately, it's no longer the middle class poor man's game. So it's become the rich man's game to get there, and we have the best policies to get to Ottawa to change this country. The other parties don't. The other parties are the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals are the same old, same old. They have promises, and some of the promises from the Conservative Party sound good, but will they follow through? Harper fell at the wheel. He had great opportunities when he had a majority to change this country from a socialist country into a capitalist country, and he failed miserably. I'll talk a little bit about myself before I get into the CPP, um, and give a little bit of history of where I came from and where I am today before I get into the CPP. But I just want to piggyback a little on what Stephen was talking about the waste of billions of dollars in this country. There's billions of dollars going to other countries that we don't even know the countries. We don't trade with the countries. We don't know why the money is going there. There's millions going to Hamas, who's a terrorist group that's bombing Israel with our money, with our taxpayers' money. Money going to Palestine. We have Palestinians and we have Muslims in the streets of Canada crying out, and I'm talking the streets of Toronto and Calgary, that are crying out for the death of Jews and for Jews to be in body bags. This is in Canada. And Trudeau has allowed this to enter the country. Now, I just want to piggyback on what Stephen was talking about. I read an article in the National Post today, and as you can tell, I'm a little bit older than Stephen, and I remember when Pierre Trudeau got voted in 1967. And Pierre Trudeau, I remember my father saying about Pierre Trudeau that this is the first step of a great country being destroyed. And at age 15, I didn't really realize what he was talking about until back in 1973, after 6 years of him being in power. I saw our country go from one of the strongest financially countries, which is next to the United States at that time. Our dollar was more powerful. We had no debt, and we had very little inflation. In the small 6 years of Pierre Trudeau, with his influx of immigrants from Africa and Pakistan, he put them on welfare, which was a great drain. He borrowed money from foreign banks, France and Germany. He put us in debt to the amount of 700% of our GDP. And what resulted in that is inflation rose to over 19%. In the little bit of time he was in power, and the reason he stayed in power, and this is the only reason that politicians want migrants into this country and put them on welfare. This is the only reason, and don't let anybody tell you anything different, because I came from the Trudeau era. They want votes. You put them on welfare, and they're going to vote for you. And they come from socialist welfare countries, and that's how they want to be treated. They come to our country, they don't believe in paying taxes. Harper did a study on immigrants into our country and found that only 20% of immigrants in this country right now with Canadian citizenship that own businesses, only 20% actually pay taxes. Now, that's astounding that the immigrants that come here. Now, I'm not saying that we're against immigration, but what we need to do is we need to get a party in Ottawa that's going to take a look at the seriousness of this country instead of the politicians that are only interested in two things: votes and money. They don't have your interest in you, in them. They don't care whether your culture goes down the drain or whether you're paying through the teeth through in taxes. Just as an example, we're connected at the hip with the United States, and the United States is undoubtedly a capitalist country. We are a socialist country. There's been no history of a socialist country ever succeeding or surviving. And we're connected at the hip with a capitalist country. Now, to put that in perspective, what that all comes down to is the American citizen who makes $100 pays $56 in taxes. He goes home with the rest. She goes home with the rest. In Canada, a Canadian this is combined taxes, by the way. A Canadian who makes $100 goes home with $11. $89 of that $100 goes to whether it's the municipal government, the provincial government, or the federal government, or E-on taxes and G-on taxes and LBG taxes. Trudeau tried to get the carbon tax in. Now, the carbon tax, as far as I'm concerned, is just another word for GST. And I'll talk about the GST in my presentation. But I just wanted to piggyback on what Stephen said. We have a serious problem in this country, and the problem is it's not politics. It's not the politicians. It's you, the voter. You're the problem. If you're watching CTV and you're watching CBC and watching those other left-wing media sources, and you're taking what they say as gospel, you are the problem. You're not doing research. CPAC, for instance, did a study 5 years ago on the last, prior to the last election, and they asked voters what they would vote on. What turned out in the survey was only 3% of 64% of the voters understood what they were voting for. So what are the other people voting for? If they don't know what they're voting for, they're voting for a guy that might have nice hair or he might have dimples. You know, I mean, we have a serious problem in this country. If you're not getting involved in for instance, the National Citizen Alliance, what they're talking about, not understanding what we're talking about, you're not understanding or just taking for gospel what Andrew Scheer says or what Pierre Trudeau says or I forget I forget his first name, but if you just take for gospel what they're saying and vote because he's a nice guy, then you're the problem. You've got to get involved. You got to understand what politics is all about. So anyway, that's I just wanted to piggyback on that, Stephen. If you want to add to that, go ahead.
Excellent point, everybody. And Greg made an excellent point just about our uncompetitiveness to the USA. But I'm not going to go any further, Greg. I think we should get to CPP. This is
Yeah.
astounding, everyone. And you are getting ripped off. That's all we're saying. You, your family, are getting ripped off. If you paid CPP all your life and you're collecting it now, you've been ripped off. That's the bottom line. And we got a plan to help you, everyone. You should be rich, because I'll tell you, that's if you work from a young man, young woman for 30 years, and then you got your retirement for 30 years. That's 60 years of investment. You should be a millionaire. So let's get into CPP, Greg.
Okay. So just a little bit of history about myself. I'm a old reformer from 1988. I was asked to join the party. Preston Manning at the time developed a party from Alberta. I don't know what it is about Albertans, but they're a different breed than what Maritimers are. And so anyway, Preston Manning started the party, and when they started, everybody said that they'll never go anywhere because there was only three parties in Canada. Well, in the 90s, not only did Preston Manning take the party to the majority competitors, but they destroyed the Conservative Party of Canada with only holding, I believe, around 6 seats. So the reason that they're called the Conservative Party today is they pretty well purchased the name from the Conservative Party. But I'm an old reformer, and I helped with some of the policies with the Reform Party. And from what I had seen over the last 8 years, that they were moving away from their policies and going more towards socialism. Socialism's not going to exist. We're not going to survive as long as we have socialism. Canadians got to start thinking about depending on themselves. So CPP is one of my pet peeves because I believe it's one of the biggest ripoffs in Canada. And I shouldn't say the word ripoff. It's one of the most destructive socialist program in Canada. CPP was introduced in 1964 by the Pearson government, Liberal government. And it's 1965 it was passed. And the purpose for CPP was back in the 60s, there weren't a lot of pensions with companies. Unions weren't as strong, and the government. It was a good thing at the time. The government saw that people needed pensions, and they thought it would be a great idea to collect the money from the employer and the employee and hold it for them. And when I use the word hold it, that's all they did. They didn't invest it. So they lost over 50 years of compounded interest investment which had really hurt them. So right now, to put this in perspective, and first, before I go on, if you don't know anything else about politics and you don't know what to vote for, this is one of the policies and the only policy you should vote for. If you want the NCA to go to Ottawa, you need to vote for the NCA to go to Ottawa to change this. Right now, there's $300 billion sitting in an account with the title CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. In 10 years' time, there's going to be $900 billion. Now, that sounds great, and that is great, but I'm going to give you all the negatives why it is not a good thing for the government to control CPP. CPP, and my wife is running around behind me, so she should wave to the audience, I think. At least she should when she goes by. The CPP, what a lot of people don't understand, and it's one of these things that are silent because it's taken from your paycheck, and you look at it and you go, oh my God, I over-contributed to CPP, so I'm going to get $600 back. Well, Trudeau changed the CPP contributions, and he changed a lot of things in the financial world, which I'll get into in another interview. I just want to focus on CPP. But he increased the contribution limit on CPP of anybody making over $50,000 to 9.9%. So what that works out to is the employee, the employee, has to pay half of that. And the employer has to take his profits and match that contribution. The Canadian government has never, to this day, put a dime into CPP, not one dime. And they're controlling $300 billion of Canadians' tax money. That's their money. That's your money. And they have it. And they're not going to give it to you. Because I'll tell you why they don't give it to you. Ma and Pa have been working for 30 years. I'll give you an example. Ma contributes, let's say, $2,500 with the employer contribution, $2,500 in total. Pa, he contributes $2,500. So there's two in the family for 30 years they have been contributing $5,000. When you run the numbers on $2,500, let's just run it on Ma. When you run it on $2,500 over a period of 30 years of working, just minimum 30 years, most people are 32, 35, and $2,500 is a far cry from 51, which is the maximum, right? So we're talking low-wage earners there, okay, all right, for $2,500. So when you run those numbers of $2,500, Ma would have $331,000 in investments if she were allowed to invest that. Okay? Now, if you can't follow the numbers when I talk about the numbers, just ask me to send it to you. I'll send the numbers to you. Just send me off your email. My email, Stephen. You put it through Stephen, and I'll send it out to you. So Ma will collect $331,000 if she were to allow to invest that. Now, what makes that worse is she's not allowed to deduct that from her income tax, and of course it's recorded in the lowest column of her income tax. So if she were allowed to deduct it and put it into, and this is what we're proposing, is that you own the contributions. The government no longer owns your contributions or your employer's contributions. You get to own it. So it's going to be in a locked-in registered retirement fund, or it'll be in a locked-in registered retirement funds. Okay? So that means that you will have, at the end of your retirement, at your lowest $2,500, you'll have $331,000. Now, if you were to draw 6% from that for a period of, say, 30 years, you'd be able to draw an average of $17,000, $18,000 a year. The average payout from a CPP to a Canadian today is $651. Now, that's pretty sickening. Now, that would have been a full contribution of 107. I'm just going by memory here, so my numbers might be a little bit off, but that's a full contribution of $176,000 over a period of, of 30 years. So what the government is doing is they're paying you out on what you've contributed, not what has compounded. So all those years, over 50 years, the government hasn't invested that money. It just sat in the coffers. I suspect the government probably borrowed on it at times. They may have leveraged it at times. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But right now, that money sits with the Crown Corporation. The CEOs of those Crown corporations in 2009 were giving themselves millions of dollars in bonuses in 2009. Now, we all know what happened in 2008 and 2009. There was a crash in the market, in the Canadian market, as well as the American market, because of the prime rate bonds that tanked out on mortgages in the United States, which affected us all. Now, in 2009, we're still held over. I mean, we had a recession in the market from 2008 all the way through 2011. I mean, we're all struggling trying to make money in the market. But meanwhile, the CEOs of this Crown Corporation were paying themselves millions of dollars in bonuses, while the average Canadian was getting payout of $651. So here's what we're proposing. We're proposing to take over the CPP, get rid of the bureaucracy, the Crown Corporation bureaucracy, where they're taking millions and millions of dollars. It doesn't make sense why you're getting $651 a month. They're getting millions of dollars. So what we're proposing is that you're going to get the money that you have contributed to invest. It's going to be locked in, so you can't take it out on one lump sum, because we don't want you to run out of money. That's the whole purpose of CPP, was it was put in place so you wouldn't run out of money. So we want to carry that on. So the only time you'd be able to get large amounts of money out is if it happened to be sickness, a very serious sickness, and you need the money for drugs or an operation or whatever. But and they're the things that we'll fine tune when we get to Ottawa. So so what we're proposing, not only that you're going to start to control your money, that means that $300 billion has to be distributed not only to the survivors today, but the survivors of yesterday. What that means is if mom and pa passed away, then the children are going to be the beneficiaries of their contributions. Now, if you don't understand what that means, again, I can elaborate at another time. So here's what happens. Ma, pa pay into CPP. Ma passes away. Pa only gets half of what ma paid in. When pa passes away, the government gets it all. That does not make sense. Why would the government keep ma and pa's money when meanwhile the children are struggling to go to university, they're struggling to maybe buy a house, and the government keeps that money? And the government, I'll say it again, had not put a dime, not a dime, into CPP. So what in good God are they doing with that money? So what we're proposing is if Ma has 331,000, Pa has $331,000. That's over $500,000. They draw from that at an average of, I think I put in 7%. Stephen, can you just put that up?
Yeah, I'm gonna put it up here. It was at 8%. This is the data, everyone. So we're gonna put it up here, Greg, and I'm gonna see it, Greg. So I guess I'll go through it if that's okay with you.
Yep.
It's right here, everyone. Here's the data, everyone. I hope you can see it. So it's at 8%, Greg. 30 years, and
Compounded interest. Yep.
yeah,
Invested
and there's a deposit of 2,500, and then there's each year it's
per
2,500
year.
per year.
2,500 per
So
year.
everyone, if we go through from year one all the way down to year 30, that's a year you retire. You've put in 77,500, and you have growth of $253,500. it comes to total, that's what you own is 331,000. Everyone, Greg, and so everyone, so that's your retirement. That's when you retire. But when you're in retirement, that money stays in, and you start taking money out. So you got an opening balance of 331,000, everyone, and you're taking out here. It's 19,861 per year.
Instead of $7,200.
Yeah, instead of $7,200. But get
And here,
this.
if I can just intercede,
Yeah, sure.
if I can just intercede,
Go ahead.
that here you see these numbers. Very important that you pay attention to these numbers. Uh, Vote future voters for the NCA, because what's really important here is the current CPP is paying out $651 a month, and old age security is paying out another, I believe, $7,000-8,000 a year. These people that paid into this are living below the poverty line with the combination CPP and old age security. So what we're proposing is not only making Canadians in the future rich, but we're going to allow you to deduct that from your income tax, allowing you to get another $800 a year refund, which you can reinvest, and the future Canadians, which you, the beneficiaries, your children, will be millionaires 30 years down the road. Do you know what this country would look like if you took our policy, you put us into Ottawa, and we were to change CPP? You know what this country would look like in 30 years' time? Everybody would be a millionaire just on CPP.
Yes, indeed. So, excellent point. And what Greg's saying, and there's right now the government only gives half to your spouse when you die, nothing to your, and when your spouse dies, nothing to your kids. We would erase that, everyone, so that your spouse gets 100%. When your spouse dies, your kids get 100%,
100%.
divided up amongst them, depending how many kids, Greg. But I
Yep.
think the important point here too, Greg, and everyone, when you're in retirement at year one, you got 331,000. You're taking out 19,986, and the government is only giving you 7,800. You're almost tripling that.
And they're keeping it all
Yeah,
at the
another
end.
point is that your money's still growing, everyone, because your balance has grown to 336,000. So let's assume you live to 90 years old. So the balance now on your investment is 546,379. At year 30 into your retirement, you're taking out 32,783. You've taken out over 30 years over 750,000, everyone.
Living above the poverty line.
Above the poverty, and when you die, everyone, your investment has grown to 555,000, which would go to your spouse. And if your spouse isn't there, it would go to your kids. We would be wealthy, everyone.
Wealthy country, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I'm sorry, Greg, this is an absolute ripoff. It has to be, Greg. I know you
Oh,
don't want to
yeah.
use that term, but I hope everyone saw the data there. It is
Well, it's
unbelievable.
actually it's a joke because they formed a Crown Corporation in 1999 because they discovered that the government. Now the government shouldn't run anything financially, really. They should stay out of finances. They should run the country to make sure we have better roads and clean water. We've got all kinds of Indian reserves, First Nation reserves without water, and billions of dollars are leaving the country. Like, this country is a joke. Now the big joke here is they formed a Crown Corp. Paul Martin started a Crown Corporation. I imagine his buddies, and they're all making millions of dollars. And they all of a sudden in 1999 found the stock market. And what was interesting is when all these big corporations in the United States started to expand globally into Russia and into India and into China with their McDonald's and Coke and Pepsi, all those, We were getting double digits on the stock market all through the 90s. And where did your money sit? It was asleep. So here's what's interesting. Here's what, even today, these guys are making millions of dollars in bonuses. They're taking the money that you contributed and they're investing it in foreign bonds in foreign countries in the corporate bonds. Now, the thing is bonds don't give you a really great return. Bonds is almost like a safe haven. I refer to it as a mattress when the market is going down. It's good to have a little bit of money in bonds so all of your money doesn't go down into a correction. But if we were to take $300 billion today and flow it into the market, giving it to financial advisors, not the banks, because the banks want you in they're just as bad as the Crown Corporation because they want you in GICs. And GICs, a lot of people don't know what a GIC is, but a GIC is a volume of money that the banks want you in, so they can lend out your money that you put in GICs, so they can make compounded interest on your money and give you a simple interest of 1%. But if you were to take that $300 billion and flow it into the economy through independent financial advisors, we'd have an influx immediately of $1.5 billion now into the cash flow in the consumer spending. Then we'd have a future of compounded interest making Canadians millionaires. And we'd have that cash flow outside the government and in the hands of the consumers. That would boost the consumer spending. So not only would taking the CPP out of the hands of the government not only help the contributors that have been contributed and their children in the future making Canadians millionaires, but it'll also boost the consumer spending. And that's where we fail in this country because we're so highly taxed. And I'm going to flow into the GST on this. We're so highly taxed in this country that we're missing out on one large target that runs the economy in the United States. There's one big economy that runs the United States. What do you think it is? I gave you the hint. Consumer spending. Consumer spending. It's not industry. It's not import. It's not export. It's consumer spending. Consumer spending in the United States drives the economy. And you heard me earlier saying that for every dollar made, the Americans go home with 54 cents in their pocket, where Canadians only go home with 11. I used $100, but I'll bring it into pennies. So Canadians go home with 11 cents. If it's $100, it's $11. And there's the difference, is we're slaves to the Canadian tax system. And what I mean by slaves is we don't have that cash flow to boost the consumer spending. And if we were, that's a great economy that's untapped in this country. So what the NCA wants to do is start to lower taxes. So by doing that, we're not going to put a dime outside this country for no country. No country will receive a dime until we reduce the taxes of our own people and we start to boost consumer spending. That means that we have to be par with the United States. The United States are going home with $54 on every $100, so does a Canadian. We've got to be par, and we've got to get rid of the GST. Every government runs on this. Do you remember Christian? Got elected twice on the Red Book. He held the Red Book up, although he never opened the page, but he kept pointing at the Red Book saying, we're getting rid of the GST. It's right in the Red Book. He got voted twice. This is how stupid the voters are, is he got voted twice on that campaign, and not once did he lower or get rid of the GST. When a government brings a tax in, they don't care about the Canadian consumer. They don't care about the Canadian voter. That's all they care about is staying in politics. And the more money that they can bring in, the more social programs they can get in. And the more social programs they can get in, the more socialist voters are going to vote for them. So it's like a snake eating the snake. You're not getting any further ahead. It's like Churchill said, government has never given you anything that they haven't taken away from you first. And socialism is destined to fail. You look at Venezuela, you look at Turkey, you look at Spain, Italy, Greece, any of those socialists, Cuba, Russia, you look at all of them. They all fail. And we're headed in the same direction. And if we don't wake up and get a government in Ottawa we are doomed to fail, because you cannot. Socialism is spending other people's money until you run out and you've got to borrow. And that's what the old fart Trudeau did, is he ran out of the money and he had to borrow. And he borrowed heavily. And that's why we're paying high taxes today. So we're making a promise that not one dime, I shouldn't be saying this because you're the president, but I'm just repeating what you're saying, but we are not giving one dime out of this country until the people of this country are helped first and the taxes are lowered. So for God's sakes, I plead with you, start sending money to the NCA and get the declaration form signed, get this party into Ottawa, and start putting money into your pockets. Because there is no government in Canada right now that is going to do what we're talking about right now. No government.
And that's only the CPP, everyone, and that's taxation. And we can go into, you address the foreign aid. That's going to be stopped. We got to look after our veterans, our seniors.
Yeah.
These socialism programs coming out. You hear it in the current government, everyone. They talked about this child care program. It's like what Greg said. Well, who's paying for it? And then you talk about the debt. Greg, you didn't get into that. All the money owed to commercial banks and the interest payments to commercial banks.
I'll tell you what I see here. If we don't get out of socialism, this country is split down the middle. And the West is going to separate from Canada. They're the ones with all the natural resources. Saskatchewan has been fracking for 40 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that, of our policies, that the have-not provinces like Ontario and Quebec and Nova Scotia and PEI and New Brunswick, I don't know if Newfoundland is receiving any transfer payments now, but I call them welfare payments. All that money, those billions of dollars that flow into Nova Scotia right now and to Ontario and Quebec, that all comes from the fracking wells in Saskatchewan and the oil sands in Ottawa. And you'll see CBC will get on and call it the oil sands or the tar sands. They call it the tar sands. Meanwhile, taxpayers give CBC $1.6 billion a year, and the oil sands contribute to that CBC. What I'd suggest for the NCA to do is put CBC up for sale on the venture exchange and see where it goes. If it survives on the venture exchange, fine. But I don't see any need for CBC anymore. It's a left-wing media source. They don't tell you the truth. As Donald Trump has said, it's a fake news. And I'd suggest anybody that's watching this program tonight to stop watching it, because it's a brain-numbing program that does a good job on dumbing people down and brainwashing them. I saw a little cartoon the other day, and it showed Captain Spock from the Enterprise and Captain Kirk standing in front of a TV with CBC logo, and Spock said, "This is the machine that they use to brainwash the people." I thought that was quite funny. But just to touch on the GST, the GST, Mulroney brought that in, and Mulroney was no different than any other socialist politician. When he brought it in, he lied to the Canadian people. He said that he was in New Zealand, and New Zealand brought in GST and they paid their debt off. But what he didn't tell the Canadian people is New Zealand had zero tax at the time. So what Brian Mulroney did is he hired a bunch of henchmen. John Buchanan was one here in Nova Scotia, and I'm sure they all got financially rewarded for doing their salesman job, and like the used car salesmen that they are, and selling $2 cars. So the Canadian people swallowed it up, thinking that it was going to pay the debt off. But it didn't. It didn't go. It went to social programs. So what he created here was a huge government bureaucracy. When we talk about shrinking government, that's what we're talking about. And some people may say, "Oh my God, you're going to get rid of jobs." No, we're going to create jobs, because what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the GST. that will uh, uh, help the small businessman that has one employee, two employees, 12 employees, that has to develop this huge bureaucracy on behalf of the GST, that they have to hire accountants and bookkeepers and remit their GST quarterly and make sure it's paid. And if there's a mistake, now they're tied up with accountants, and their profits go out on accountants. If there's a mistake, to work on the mistake, and their profits go out to accountants to make sure that the remittance is done. That's ridiculous. A small businessman, a plumber, for God's sakes, that has one guy working for him, has to stop and do this remittance on behalf of the government. And they've got this huge bureaucracy. It's just another arm of CRA. And, uh, and that's all that's doing is destroying our economy, guys. And we've got to change this country. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, there's going to two things that are going to happen if the NCA doesn't get in to Ottawa in 2019. Is the Western provinces will separate because they have control of our economy. And they're tired of sending transfer payments to provinces that don't frack. Here in Nova Scotia, the Liberal government, they have a moratorium on fracking. The NDP has a moratorium on fracking. The Conservative government, after I pounded the drum with them a few times, they started to catch on that, oh my God, fracking's a good thing. They didn't realize Saskatchewan has been fracking for 40 years. They didn't know that the United States is becoming a fracking powerhouse with over 1 million fracking wells. And anybody that tells you that fracking is dangerous and it poisons water is an idiot. There's no other word for them. They're frickin' idiots. So if somebody opens their mouth and says fracking is bad, it poisons water, don't even have a conversation with that idiot, because they have a peanut brain, or they smoke too much marijuana. I don't know. But anyway, GST has to go. It has to get rid of the bureaucracy to help the small businessman. And Stephen's policy it talks about the flat tax and zero tax for anybody under the poverty line, which is around $21,000 a year now. So the last numbers I looked at was 20 years ago, and I don't know if the numbers were true or not 20 years ago, but CRA reported to StatsCan that 52% of Canadians over the age of 65 are filing income tax below the poverty line. That's net taxes. So I don't know if those numbers still hold true or not, but we got a serious problem with our seniors that are living below the poverty line. So this CPP is going to help them, because, for an example, if Ma has passed or Pa has passed, Ma is going to get Pa's CPP. She'll be able to invest it and start drawing reasonable income to get her out of that poverty line.
Yeah, but assuming, let's say mom worked all her life too, Greg, so she would double.
Right.
She could get almost
Yeah.
40,000 a year off
Right.
CP
Right.
because they
We're
roll
talking. Yeah, but we're
instead of
talking low num. Yeah, but we're talking low numbers.
exactly.
If I popped in $5,000, we're now talking $651,000. That's just for Ma. That's the maximum, right? So the average Ma, I don't know if that terminology, it suits me fine for right now for a shortcut, but uh, Ma is say working for the phone company, and she's earning 60,000. She's paying the maximum CPP, 51,000. Pa's working for the phone company. He's making 60,000 a year. He's paying the maximum. You punch those numbers in over 30 years, paying the maximum, they're well over 600,000 each. So there's 1.2 million dollars. They're now earning close to $70,000 in CPP that they're going to be able to pass on to their children.
Wow, amazing, amazing, everyone. And I just want to clarify some things that we support. Some people are talking about our volume. Uh, so we'll have to address that. But hold on, I'm just gonna check something here. Um, oh, my apologies, everyone. Okay, the volume is up, everyone. This is our first time using this system, so we will improve over time, everyone. We apologize for the volume. I just want to clarify, Greg, that socialist welfare handouts, everyone, as Greg astutely went into. But at the same time, we support helping Canadians truly in need. And there's a difference between a welfare socialist system versus helping those in truly need.
Well,
Right?
if Trudeau has $20 million to give to Hamas to buy bombs to blow Israel up, we have $20 million to give to our people.
Yes.
So why is it going to Hamas?
Exactly.
Why is 600 million going? Why did $600 million go to the most corrupt charity foundation in the world, which is the Clinton Foundation, where they collected $798 million from the Haiti disaster, and they spent $52 million to give Haiti $1 million. Haiti never saw a dime of that $1 million.
Okay, fair enough. And another thing too.
So so Trudeau gave 600 million to the Clinton Foundation of our money.
Yeah,
Why?
it wasn't
The most
direct
corrupt
funding.
people.
Exactly. It was indirect funding. There was a direct 20 million funding to the Clinton Foundation. There's billions being dispersed all over the world. Everyone. Another thing about the GST, it's going to help small business, but most importantly, it's going to put money into the people's hands. More money. And as Greg said, consumer spending is the true engine of the economy. And so that's going to do wonders for our
Yeah.
economy. So we believe in small, efficient government, less taxation, everyone. We believe the Canadian people, the more money they have, the better our country will be. And let's get government out of the way. That's what we believe as a party. Look at the CPP. Look what they've done, everyone. Can you summarize the CPP, Greg? They've basically taken this money. They have your money. It's over 300 billion, and you're getting a piddless 651 a month. And if we did that privately out of government hands, you'd be getting around 19,000. 19,000 a month.
But that's on the low end.
That's on the low
So
end too.
yeah, that's on the low end. That's 2,500 contributed every year. That's employer and employee combination 2,500. Whereas the average contributor is contributing close to $5,000 a year. So if you have two individuals that are working earning over $50,000 a year, if they were able to invest that themselves into a locked-in RSP or a LIRA, locked-in investment retirement fund, um, then they'll be able to deduct that contribution against their income tax, which they're not allowed with the CPP. And what we'll do is allow them to deduct it at the highest tax bracket. So if somebody earning $60,000 is in a 45% tax rate in Nova Scotia, I think it's 44 in Alberta, but they'll be able to deduct it in the highest tax bracket, and either get a refund to buy whatever, or to reinvest it for their retirement.
Excellent, everyone. So
CPP is a joke, really.
it is the way it's
Yeah,
being administered, everyone.
yeah.
We could all, most Canadians could be wealthy. Another thing about CBT, I have to mention, Greg, is there's new immigrants coming in. They haven't paid a dime, and they're on it.
Are they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's grandparents coming in, and I've talked to other members,
Oh my
and they're
God.
on CPP.
Oh my God.
Can you believe it?
Yeah, this country
And they've
is
never
going.
put a dime into it, and yet they're on CPP.
Yeah, the Trudeau government is turning this country into a giant outhouse.
And
Yeah.
another thing too is they're going to be increasing CPP. Did you know that?
Well, I talked about that in my
Yeah,
in
it's
my
going up. It's
presentation.
going up.
It's up 9.9%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So the contribution, so the employer uh, has to contribute and match your contribution. That comes from an uh, employer's profits. So what if we were to say let's make just the employee contribute rather than the employer. That's going to save the employer millions of dollars. Like I'm talking big employers that have well over 5,000 employees. That's going to save them thousands and thousands of dollars, millions over a period of time. There's no need of that the way it is. It could be funded and organized and managed much more efficiently out of the hands of the government. So we have to take that 300 billion away from the government, distribute it back to the contributors, and the contributors that have passed has to be passed on to their children.
Yeah, excellent stuff, everyone. Um, yeah, I'm sorry about the sound issues. We're going to address that issue, and it's going to be better next time. But this is new technology, and we're going to get it worked out, everyone. It's just learn, and we may do, depending on the volume issues, we may do another session on this to make sure everyone gets it, Greg.
Well, let me just ask again, the people that are listening, could you some sort of indication that you've heard it or you didn't hear it, and where you're from? We'd appreciate that to get some sort of census of who's listening and how many people are listening. Also, I'd like to do a little plug here, a little advertisement that we need money to get to Ottawa. It's great to have great policies. You know, and we do have good policies. We have great policies. It's great to have it, but if we're not in Ottawa, it doesn't mean anything. So, in order to get to Ottawa, as I said earlier, it's a rich man's game. We need millions to get there. The Trudeau government has raised a little over $3 million in the first quarter of this year. The Conservative government has raised over $6 million, and they're going to be running. They're going to be the two horses that are going to be running. If you want this horse running, you want Stephen and his candidates to be in Ottawa to represent you and start changing the way government thinks about our finances. Then we need money, and I appreciate you listening, but it takes money to get to Ottawa. So if you can find it to start donating, 1,000, 10,000, $50,000, $100,000, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. We also need members, volunteers to help the program manage. The NCA is nothing without the support of the Canadian people. This is in your hands. If you like what you're hearing, you like our policies, then we encourage you to support us.
I'm not a politician.
Yes.
I'm a financial advisor. I have my own financial practice in Halifax. And I'm talking to you from my cottage here in the tip of Cape Breton, I'll never be a politician. You may like some of the things I say, and you may not like some of the things I say, but at the end of the day, we want to get the job done, and we want to get it done right for the Canadian people. And the left wing socialists will not like anything that we like, and or that we're proposing. And you'll hear words come out of the mouth that we're racist and we're capitalists and we're fascists and all of that crazy stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about the Canadian people. And for me, I speak from the heart when I'm talking about CPP. If you don't have the NCA in Ottawa by 2019, your grandmother, your mother, your parents that are living below the poverty line will continue. If you're living below the poverty line, and if you don't donate and become a member and vote for the NCA, then you're going to continue living below the poverty line. Bottom line.
Excellent stuff. We're going to close it off there. We will listen to the video and make any adjustments as necessary.
Any? Does anybody have any questions coming through?